Although Otto Hightower hasn't gotten a great deal of character development throughout House of the Dragon thus far, he's already one of the most interesting and clearly one of the most important characters in the series. But what actually makes his character so relevant and intriguing is largely driven by how the audience sees him in contrast to his in-world characterization within the society of Westeros. He's an interesting player who seems strangely distinct in his indistinction. Every other major character on the scene thus far has a fairly concrete characterization. Whether their decisions are good or bad, the audience understands where they're coming from and why they do what they do. But as far as Otto goes, the only obvious personal prejudice he seems to have is against Daemon Targaryen, which, considering the circumstances, is not difficult to understand. Beyond that, the second son of House Hightower seems to hold his cards incredibly close to the vest, which seemingly presents two major possibilities for Otto's inner mentality. Either he's a good enough politician that he's capable of withholding his own desires and master plan at all times, or he's simply a man who is doing exactly what's expected of him. It'll be interesting to see how his character develops going forward now that the conflict between Rhaenyra and Alicent has become unavoidable. But his characterization in the early stages of the series is already quite meaningful and intriguing, especially in relation to the rest of the cast of characters. House Hightower is undoubtedly one of the most interesting houses in all of Westeros, as their ability to remain powerful and stable for as long as they have is impressive in its own right. Within that context, their political acumen is pretty difficult to doubt. However, the perception of Otto and Alicent as exceptionally politically overreaching is interesting, and Otto's presentation as a low-key villain is also very intriguing. Because what's the most noticeable and compelling about Otto in the early stages of the story is simply that he has done everything right. At least, according to the standards of the society that he lives in. His relationship with Alicent is disturbing to the audience, just as it should be. It undeniably comes across as if he is using Alicent as a pawn in his own political game. And the fact that he is willing to serve her up on a platter to an old man is repulsive on its face. However, it's actually fascinating to look at his actions from a different point of view. Because yes, he is offering Alicent up to a man old enough to be her father who is literally rotting alive. However, Otto knows that Viserys is a kind man who would almost certainly never mistreat Alicent, at least according to the standards of Westerosi marriages. And he is literally putting his daughter in a position where she has the most power a woman can possibly have. From the point of view of Westerosi standards and customs, Viserys is an unmarried king with no male heir who is not brutal or cruel, and who seemed to genuinely love and respect his first wife Aemma. According to the expectations of Westeros traditions, marrying Alicent to Viserys should either put her in a secure position of power forever, because she would eventually become a dowager queen and mother of the king, or a dowager queen and stepmother to Rhaenyra and her uncontested claim. And, as far as marriages go, because of the societal structure of Westeros, it could almost be considered a future advantage to be married to someone that you have a good chance of outliving by decades. Otto's work as Hand of the King is also impressive, and likely doesn't get the credit that it's due. Firstly, the fact that a second son of any house managed to attain the role of Hand is an astonishing accomplishment in its own right. And in a sense, his political machinations are absolutely masterful. I mean, he has managed to maneuver himself and his daughter into literally the highest and most powerful positions that they could possibly attain, which in theory should offer them the best lives that they could muster, and likely would have been an enormous boon to the future of their entire house as well as themselves. So then, it's quite shocking that it all went so catastrophically badly for them. Otto's characterization in Fire and Blood is somewhat vague and somewhat unreliable, as the point of view that the book is written through can obviously cast any character in a remarkably different light based on the personal biases of the fictional author. But his development in House of the Dragon is fascinating and has to be intentional, because while the books paint him as proud, brusque, and haughty, the version we see on screen is incredibly soft-spoken and almost comically temperate. In a broader sense, this, along with many other characterizations that conflict with Fire and Blood, would indicate that some reader's suspicion of bias in the point of view of the books is more than a suspicion. But it is of particular interest when it comes to Otto's inscrutable manner, because it begs the question of what his true thoughts and intentions are. And there have been some subtle indications that Otto was not the diabolical mastermind that he is oftentimes perceived to be. Although it may have been his briefest interaction in the series thus far, Otto's momentary engagement with his brother, where his brother pressed him to fight for Aegon's claim to the throne, was interesting, both because it indicates that Otto probably hasn't been pushing the issue on his own, but also because his ultimate advice to Viserys seems telling. It's undeniable that Otto works to advance himself, his daughter, and his house, but the fact that he suggests that Viserys marry Rhaenyra and Aegon is interesting because it's so pragmatic. Yes, she's a teenager and he's a baby, but given that Viserys has single-handedly created a succession crisis that he's going far out of his way to ignore, marrying the two potential rival claimants together is actually probably the best course of action by that point. And what's more interesting about that is that once again, Otto does work for himself as well as the king, so his advice never really seems to be bad. Or more specifically, he doesn't seem to offer counsel that would benefit Otto or House Hightower at the expense of Viserys or the realm. Otto's rivalry with Daemon is one of the only glimpses that we get into his own personal feelings. However, he's also 100% right. Daemon is an incredibly unreliable and dangerous person who would likely pull the realm apart if he ever had the Iron Throne. And while there's obvious animosity between them, Otto is also acting in everyone's best interest when he suggests that Viserys name Rhaenyra the heir to the throne rather than Daemon. So it's ironic that this suggestion comes back to bite him so brutally in the end. Similarly, while he's good at crafting a narrative that benefits himself and his goals, he's never actually wrong. When Viserys discusses the proposed marriage between himself and Laena, Otto discourages it because she's too young, which is a fair comment to make considering that Aemma's early pregnancies are likely why she and Viserys never had another living child besides Rhaenyra. But when he's directly confronted with the positive aspects of a potential union between the Iron Throne and Driftmark, he admits that the reasoning behind it is sound. And on the flip side, while Otto spying on Rhaenyra is the ultimate move that blows up in his face, he was objectively correct that this was a huge transgression that could harm the realm as well as Rhaenyra and Viserys. To act as if Rhaenyra's already questionable position as heir wouldn't be massively deteriorated by her publicly wilding out is absurd. And despite the fact that Viserys ultimately fires Otto, his gift of moon tea at the end of the episode would indicate that he believes Otto was telling the truth. The most emotion we've seen out of Otto thus far, unsurprisingly, comes with his final interaction with young Alicent. And although he's still cooler than most, his anger, fear, and genuine care for Alicent seems to be intentional facets of their last conversation. Strangely, a lot of people seem to perceive this moment as Otto putting the absurd idea that Rhaenyra's inheritance will lead to war in Alicent's head. But once again, what he's saying to her is objectively right and reasonable. Not to mention, it's certainly no coincidence that he warns Alicent that her life and the lives of her children are in danger because of Rhaenyra's claim, almost immediately after we see Daemon kill Rhea Royce because she's become an inconvenience to him. The broader perception of Otto as an intentional villain seems to be a misunderstanding of his character and the situation at large. He appears to be a pragmatic person who does exactly what a highborn man is expected to do. And he actually managed to do it better and more successfully than hardly anyone ever has. But with that said, is he a good person? No. What makes Otto an interesting character in the broader scheme of things is that he seems like an intelligent man who is almost entirely driven by expectation and duty. His actions and advice are based around the world that he knows he lives in. And although he does have some biases in favor of or against certain people, almost nothing that he has said or done thus far has been objectively wrong or incorrect. He is exactly what every man in Westeros is supposed to be, and that is precisely the problem. Westeros is a society that is defined by extreme class stratification that allows for almost no social mobility, which is ironic given that every person within that society is expected to do whatever is in their power to advance themselves further. Otto's actions seem to perfectly demonstrate that you can make all the correct moves and follow society's rules to a T, and still suffer dearly for it because someone more powerful than you, or someone on an equal power level, can take your power and destroy your life just because they decide to. Similarly, it's fascinating that he is so broadly regarded as a villain. Because yes, he absolutely should be, but his characterization is also a fantastic example that the world of Ice and Fire is full of villains because they live in a societal structure that expects that of them. And that's a game that everyone eventually loses. The things that Otto does are objectively repulsive in many circumstances, but he is the first and one of the best examples of a theme that will likely become more and more relevant as House of the Dragon wears on. Regardless of the inherent nature of the characters, the society that they live in is so unjust that it nurtures them into villainy. Now that Alicent has officially decided to advocate for herself and her children, it'll be interesting to see how Otto proceeds. Because his actions in the early stages were incredibly subtle and struck a clear balance between what would benefit him and what would benefit the realm. However, now it will be obvious to him that he's going to have to solely look out for himself and his family, so it'll be intriguing to see how his character evolves going forward. But regardless of who he becomes as the story moves on, the presentation of his characterization at the start of the series seems incredibly intentional and informative. His actions from the beginning seem to be those of a man who is simply doing his job. Whether that job is as Hand of the King, as a servant of House Hightower, or as Alicent's father. In a sense, he is little more than an unadulterated reflection of the world that he lives in. And that reflection isn't pretty. But what do you think? Is Otto Hightower a somewhat misunderstood character? Or is he just a bad guy who is smart enough to hide his true villainy? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.